They saw a frayed hoodie in seat 12, F, and decided she didn't belong. What they didn't see, the calloused hands that once gripped a control stick through enemy fire, the discipline that kept 3 squadrons alive, the call sign that still made warriors straighten their spines. When the plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, a squadron commander would walk down that aisle, and everything those smug passengers believed about worth power and respect would shatter in a single salute. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the end, because this story only gets more intense. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Now let's begin. The Seattle boarding gate smelled like expensive coffee and cheaper judgment. Ava Reyes stood in line with her backpack slung over one shoulder, the canvas so worn the original olive drab had faded to something like old bone. The zipper was held together with paracord, the real kind, the kind you packed because one day you might need to rappel out of something that was trying to kill you. Nobody here knew that. They saw the hoodie first. Gray, frayed at the cuffs. One pocket torn at the seam where she'd once shoved an emergency radio with shaking hands, while hydraulics screamed and the horizon tilted 30 degrees past survivable. The eagle patch on her backpack, small, threadbare, barely visible, caught a shaft of afternoon light through the terminal windows. It was the only thing about her that gleamed. Around her, the first-class queue glittered. Designer carry-ons with monograms that cost more than most people's rent. A man in a suit so sharp it could draw blood checked his Rolex twice in 30 seconds, as if time itself was beneath him. A woman with platinum hair and heels that clicked like gavels scrolled through her phone, her diamond bracelet throwing tiny rainbows across the carpet. Ava kept her eyes forward, breathing steady. 4 counts in hold for 3, 6 counts out. Cockpit breathing. The kind that kept your vision clear when your wingman was bleeding and the radio was screaming static, and you had 90 seconds to make a choice that would haunt you either way. Boarding Group A, welcome aboard. The gate agent's voice had that practiced warmth that meant nothing. Ava waited. She was Group D. Always Group D. She'd learned a long time ago that the front of the plane wasn't for people like her people, whose hands remembered emergency procedures more than they remembered how to shake hands at cocktail parties. The man with the Rolex pushed past her without a word. His cologne was aggressive, the kind that announced wealth like a threat. Behind him, a couple in matching athleisure, the expensive kind with subtle logos that whispered money, instead of shouting it rolled matching Toomey luggage. They glanced at Ava's backpack at her hoodie, and their eyes slid away like she was part of the furniture. Group D. Ava moved forward. The gate agent took her boarding pass, scanned it without looking up, handed it back without meeting her eyes. Down the jetway, the recycled air tasted like fuel and anticipation. Inside the aircraft, the division was immediate and absolute. First-class, wide leather seats, warm lighting a flight attendant offering champagne with a smile that probably hurt her face. Ava walked past it all. Heads turned, but not toward her away. Making space. Creating distance. She was the wrong kind of passenger in their sanctuary. Row 12. Seat F. Window. She slid in, tucked her backpack under the seat in front of her, and pulled the seatbelt tight across her lap. Muscle memory made it snug, not the loose, comfortable clasp most passengers used, but the kind that would keep you pinned in your seat if the world decided to flip upside down at 30,000 feet. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers slightly curved. Control stick posture. She'd been retired for 3 years, and her body still didn't believe it. Excuse me. Ava looked up. The flight attendant stood in the aisle, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful smile, sharp as a filing cabinet. Her name tag said Olivia Hart. Yes. I just need to verify you're in seat 12F. Yes. Olivia's eyes traveled over Ava's hoodie, lingered on the frayed cuffs, dropped to the backpack, visible beneath the seat. Something flickered across her face, not quite disgust, something colder, assessment, conclusion, dismissal. Of course, the words were polite. The tone was a filing system. Economy section, how nice. She said it loud enough that the passengers across the aisle heard. A woman in a cream cashmere wrap looked over, took in Ava's appearance, and whispered something to her husband. He smirked. Ava said nothing. She'd learned silence in places where noise got people killed. She turned toward the window, watched the ground crew loading bags, their movements efficient and practiced. Honest work. She understood honest work. The cabin filled. More suits, more designer bags, more glances that stuck to her like oil. She heard the whispers, not the words, but the shape of them. The judgment. The story they were writing about her based on fabric and thread count. A man settled into 12E middle seat, knees spread wide into her space before he'd even buckled in. Expensive watch. Cologne that could choke a rhinoceros. He looked at her hoodie, and shifted slightly away as if poverty might be contagious. Long flight to D.C., he said to the businessman in 12D voice pitched to Carrie. You'd think they'd screen these budget tickets a little better. The businessman, 50-something red tie hair plugs that didn't quite match, laughed. Tell me about it. I paid extra to avoid sitting near, well, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ava's jaw tightened. Just the masseter muscles. Nothing visible. She'd flown missions where enemy radar was painting her jet, and she couldn't even increase her heart rate because the instruments would pick it up and her squadron would panic. She'd learned control in fires that would melt these men into their expensive shoes. Olivia returned with a drink cart. The men received their beverages with smiles, with eye contact, with, "Certainly, sir," and "My pleasure." When she reached Ava, the cart stopped, but Olivia's attention didn't. Did you need something? Not offering. Asking. Like it was an imposition. Water, please. Olivia's pause was calculated. She reached for the smallest cup, filled it halfway, set it down on Ava's tray table, with a click that sounded like a gavel. No napkin. No eye contact. Thank you, Ava said quietly. Olivia was already moving. The man in 12E watched the exchange, then leaned toward 12D. See, that's the problem with these discount carriers. They let anyone on. Sir, Ava said, voice level and low. This is Delta. The man's face reddened. I don't know what airline this is. I'm talking about the passengers they're letting into first class. This is economy. Exactly my point. Ava turned back to the window. 4 counts in. Hold. 6 counts out. Her hands wanted to curl into fists. She kept them loose. She'd broken a man's collarbone once during a training exercise gone wrong. She'd been exhausted running on 36 hours without sleep, and he'd grabbed her from behind as a joke. Muscle memory had kicked in before thought. She'd apologized while the medics splinted his shoulder. He'd apologized for underestimating her. They'd both learned something. These men wouldn't learn. Not from words. The plane pushed back from the gate. The cabin filled with the familiar sounds overhead bins clicking shut, phones reluctantly powering down nervous flyers gripping armrests. Ava's breathing stayed steady. She'd logged over 4,000 hours in the air, most of them, in machines that could kill you if you sneezed wrong. Commercial flights felt like riding a city bus. Takeoff was smooth. Seattle dropped away beneath them, the city shrinking into geometry, the sound turning into hammered silver. Ava watched until the clouds swallowed the view, then closed her eyes. Not sleeping. Calculating. She had 16 hours until the meeting in D.C. 16 hours to walk into a classified briefing room and sign the papers that would seal her service record and, more importantly, seal the records of the men and women who'd flown with her on missions that officially never happened. She was the compromise. The name they could release because she'd already left, already faded into civilian life, already become invisible. The others were still active, still in the field, still doing work that would get them killed if the wrong people knew their names. So Ava would be the face, the documented pilot, the one who took the credit and the scrutiny so they could stay in the shadows where shadows kept you alive. The cabin settled into the drone of flight. Somewhere in first-class laughter bubbled up champagne laughter, the kind that came easy when the world bent to your wallet. Ava sipped her half-cup of water, making it last. She'd once made a single bottle last 3 days in a desert that wanted her dead. Half a cup was luxury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The intercom crackled. Ava's attention sharpened automatically. Pilot's voice. She could read tone the way most people read text. This one was steady, but carrying something underneath. A change in the flight plan. "We'll be making a brief stop at Andrews Air Force Base for refueling. Should add about 45 minutes to our flight time. We apologize for the inconvenience." The cabin erupted in groans, complaints, immediate phone activity. The man in 12E swore under his breath. 45 minutes. I have a meeting." The businessman in 12D was already typing furiously. "This is unacceptable." But Ava wasn't hearing any of it. Her focus had narrowed to a pinpoint the way it did when the missile warning system started screaming. Andrews. She knew Andrews. She'd flown out of Andrews. She'd landed at Andrews with an engine on fire and a hydraulic system held together with hope, and a prayer whispered in Spanish because English had fled her brain somewhere over the Atlantic. Her call sign had been logged at Andrews, filed, documented, stored in systems that were supposed to stay buried. Her hands pressed flat against her thighs. Control. The hoodie suddenly felt thinner. The backpack under the seat felt heavier. The faded eagle patch might as well have been glowing. "Great," 12E muttered. "Now we're stopping at some military base. Probably gonna take forever. At least it's not another budget airline disaster." 12D added, shooting a glance toward Ava. She didn't react, but her breathing had changed. 4 counts in. Hold for 4 now. 8 counts out. Combat breathing. The kind you used when you knew contact was coming and you needed every bit of oxygen to stay sharp. The plane began its descent. Outside the window, the landscape shifted from farmland to something more structured. Runways, hangars, the distinct geometry of military infrastructure. And then she saw them. F-22 Raptors. A full squadron. Lined up on the tarmac like silver bullets, canopies gleaming in the late afternoon sun. 5th-generation fighters. The kind of aircraft that cost more than a small country's GDP. The kind of aircraft flown by pilots who'd earned the right to sit in that cockpit through years of training so brutal it broke most candidates before they ever touched the stick. Ava's throat tightened. She'd flown with F-22 pilots. She'd led them through airspace so hostile that 3 of them had puked in their masks from the stress. She'd brought them home. All of them. Every single one. They'd never forgotten. The question was, had they forgotten her face? The 737 touched down with a chirp of tires. Through the window, Ava could see the F-22s more clearly now. Ground crews moving around them, pilots in flight suits walking the line. This wasn't a random refueling stop. This was an active fighter wing. This was home territory for people who spoke her language. The plane taxied to a stop near a hangar that Ava recognized. She'd debriefed in that hangar. She'd screamed in that hangar after a mission where she'd had to leave a drone operator behind because physics and fuel wouldn't let her go back. She'd been 28 years old, and she'd learned that saving 7 people meant accepting you couldn't save 8. The pilot's voice returned. Professional. Calm. But with an edge now. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be here approximately 30 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We may have some special guests coming aboard. Special guests. At a military base. Ava's pulse kicked up. Just 5 beats per minute. Enough that she noticed. Not enough that anyone else would. She'd trained her cardiovascular system like a weapon. Even now in a frayed hoodie in seat 12, her body was still a finely tuned instrument of survival. Special guests. 12E scoffed. What some general needs a photo op? Olivia appeared in the aisle, her professional mask slightly cracked. She looked excited. Important. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed that some members of the F-22 squadron will be greeting select passengers. Please remain calm and courteous. Select passengers. The emphasis was unnecessary and absolute. Her eyes swept the cabin, lingering on first class, skipping over economy like it was empty space. Ava felt the old anger try to surface. The kind that had gotten her in trouble during training when an instructor had told her women didn't have the upper body strength for fighter jets, and she'd done 200 push-ups without breaking eye contact. She'd been right. He'd been wrong. But she'd also learned that being right didn't matter if you couldn't control the fire it ignited. So she breathed. 4 in, 4 hold, 8 out. The minutes dragged. Outside, a ground crew began refueling. The professional part of Ava's brain noted the procedure, the safety protocols, the positioning. The civilian part tried to pretend she was invisible. She wasn't. The cabin door opened, not the one at the front, the one in the middle adjacent to first class. Military boots on commercial carpet. The sound was distinct. Ava heard it before she saw anything. Then she saw him. Colonel Marcus Bennett. Older now, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 years ago. But the posture was the same. The presence was the same. He wore his flight suit like a second skin patches on the shoulders that told a story of skill and survival. His eyes swept the cabin with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd learned to assess threats in microseconds. He greeted the first-class passengers with the appropriate professionalism. Shook hands with the businessman who'd paid for the privilege. Smiled at the platinum-haired woman who suddenly looked like a teenager meeting her favorite celebrity. Made small talk about the jets, about the squadron, about what an honor it was to serve. His voice was steady, but Ava heard the performance in it. The duty, the requirement. Then he turned toward economy. His eyes swept the rows. 11, 12, 13. Scanning. Looking for... He stopped. His entire body went still. Not frozen. Focused. The way you go still when you've just seen something on radar that shouldn't be there, and every alarm in your brain is screaming to pay attention. He was looking at row 12. At seat F. At Ava. Their eyes met. And Marcus Bennett's face went through an expression that Ava had seen only twice before, once when a training exercise went wrong and everyone thought she was dead, and once when she'd landed a crippled aircraft on a carrier deck in seas that should have swallowed her whole. It was recognition, and reverence, and something close to shock. He moved down the aisle. Slowly. Every passenger between first class and row 12 was watching now, confused by the attention, by the sudden shift in his energy. The man in 12E looked up, straightening, already extending his hand for the handshake he assumed was coming. Bennett walked past him. He stopped at Ava's row, bent slightly to look directly at her. His voice when it came was pitched low, but carried through the sudden silence. "Are you Midnight Viper 12? The cabin inhaled. Ava's hands were still flat on her thighs, still controlled. But her heart was hammering now, and she couldn't stop it, and she didn't try. "Yes, sir." The "sir" came automatically. Muscle memory. She'd been retired for 3 years, and her mouth still knew the protocol. Marcus Bennett straightened. His hand came up not for a handshake, for a salute. He held it there. Full attention. In the middle of a civilian aircraft. In front of passengers who had no idea what they were witnessing. Ava's body responded before her mind could stop it. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stood in the cramped space of 12F, and returned the salute. Crisp. Perfect. The way she'd done it 1,000 times. The silence in the cabin was absolute. "Ma'am," Bennett said, voice carrying, now filling the space. "Would you please accompany me?" It wasn't a request. It was a door opening, an invitation back into a world she'd thought she'd left behind. Ava looked at him, at the colonel's insignia on his flight suit, at the patches that told her he was commanding officer of the 27th Fighter Squadron, at the respect in his eyes that made her throat tight. Then she looked at the passengers around her, at 12E, whose mouth had fallen open, at 12D, whose face had gone pale, at Olivia standing in the aisle, her professional mask completely shattered. "Looks can deceive," Ava said quietly. To no one. To everyone. She reached down, picked up her backpack, slung it over her shoulder. The frayed canvas. The paracord zipper. The faded eagle patch that suddenly didn't look faded at all. Marcus Bennett stepped back to let her into the aisle. As she passed him, he murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "We thought you'd disappeared. We thought they'd buried your name so deep we'd never see you again." "They tried," Ava said. She walked down the aisle. Every eye in the cabin followed her. The businessman in the red tie, the woman in cashmere, the man with the Rolex. Olivia, whose face had cycled through confusion and shock, and was landing somewhere near horror. At the door, another officer waited. Younger. Captain's bars. He snapped to attention when he saw her eyes going wide. "Holy shit," he whispered. "That's actually her." Bennett's voice was sharp. "Language, Captain." "Sorry, sir. Ma'am." The captain was staring at Ava like she'd just walked out of a legend. "Ma'am, the squadron is assembled. When they heard you were on the flight, He stopped. Swallowed. "They insisted, ma'am." Ava felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking. Opening. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. Being small. Letting the world decide she was nothing based on a hoodie and a backpack and the absence of a designer logo. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Really seen. By people who understood what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, what she'd become in order to keep them alive. "Lead the way," she said. They descended the stairs to the tarmac. The wind hit her immediately, that specific military base wind that smelled like jet fuel and possibility. The F-22s were closer now, their presence overwhelming. Beautiful. Deadly. each one a masterpiece of engineering and violence, and in front of them a line of pilots, 14 of them, standing at attention in full flight suits, helmets under their arms, eyes forward, waiting for her. Marcus Bennett walked beside her, his voice low and urgent. "Midnight Viper, ma'am. I need you to know what you did in 2002. The mission they classified so deep nobody's supposed to know it existed. 3 of the pilots standing in that line were in the squadrons you led through that airspace. They're alive because you held formation when everyone else said it was impossible. They're alive because you—" "I remember," Ava said quietly. Because she did. Every second. Every choice. Every moment where she'd had to decide between following orders and keeping her people alive, and she'd chosen her people every single time. They reached the line of pilots. Marcus Bennett stopped, turned to face her, and his voice rose to carry across the tarmac. "Squadron attention." 14 pairs of boots snapped together. The sound echoed off the hangar. "Present." 14 hands came up in perfect synchronization. 14 salutes, held there, unwavering, for her. Ava's vision blurred. Just for a second. She blinked it clear, because that's what you did. You held it together. You stayed steady. Even when the world tilted and your heart tried to climb out of your chest, and everything you'd buried for 3 years came roaring back. She returned the salute. Her hand was rock steady. Her spine was straight. Her shoulders were back. The woman in the frayed hoodie was gone. The pilot had returned. And on the plane behind her, pressed against the windows, passengers who'd decided she was nothing were finally understanding what they'd missed. The colonel's boots hit the cabin floor with the kind of precision that told you he'd done this 1,000 times, that every movement was calculated, that nothing about him was accidental. Ava heard it before she saw him, that particular rhythm of military footfalls on civilian carpet, the sound of order entering chaos. She pressed herself deeper into 32F instinct overriding logic, not hiding, just making herself smaller, less visible. The way she'd learned to do in the years since they'd taken her wings and told her to forget who she'd been. Up front, the first-class passengers were already standing, smoothing jackets and fixing smiles, ready to be impressive, ready to be seen. Olivia's voice carried down the aisle, too bright, too eager. "Colonel Bennett, what an honor. We're so grateful for the opportunity to—" "Where is she?" 3 words, flat, direct, the kind of question that didn't leave room for pleasantries. Ava's breath stopped. Olivia's voice faltered. "I'm sorry, sir, where is who?" "Passenger manifest shows an Ava Reyes on this flight. Seat 12F. Silence. The kind that feels like pressure in your ears. Then Olivia, again confused, now maybe a little defensive. "Oh, we had to reassign that passenger. She's in the back. 32F. Is there a problem?" Ava closed her eyes, felt her heartbeat in her throat, felt the old familiar weight of being known when you'd worked so hard to be forgotten. The footsteps started again, coming down the aisle. Steady, deliberate, not rushing but not hesitating either. Around her, passengers shifted. Confused whispers rippled through economy. The businessman across the aisle craned his neck, trying to see what was happening, why a colonel was walking past all the important people and heading for the cheap seats. "Ma'am." Ava opened her eyes. Colonel Marcus Bennett stood in the aisle beside row 32, and up close, he was exactly what she'd feared. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. A face that had seen combat and carried the weight of it well. Ribbons on his chest that told stories he'd never have to speak out loud. And in his expression, recognition. The kind that made her stomach drop. "Are you Ava Reyes?" She could lie. Could say no wrong person, you've made a mistake. Could let him walk away and disappear back into whatever life she'd been trying to build in the wreckage of the one they'd taken from her. but she'd never been good at lying. "Yes, sir." His posture changed. Subtly. His shoulders went back just slightly, his chin lifted a fraction of an inch. And then he did something that made every passenger within sight go absolutely still. He came to attention. Not the casual attention of a man being polite. Full military attention. Heels together, spine straight, arms at his sides. The kind of respect you gave to a superior officer or someone who'd earned something beyond rank. "Are you Midnight Viper 12? The call sign hit her like ordnance, like something falling from a great height and detonating in her chest. She hadn't heard it in 3 years. Hadn't spoken it. Hadn't let herself think it because thinking it meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling all the things she'd locked away in boxes marked classified and never speak of this. Her voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "That was a long time ago, sir." "That's not what I asked." The businessman across the aisle was staring now, mouth slightly open. Behind Ava, she could hear the whispers starting. "Midnight. What is that, military? What's happening?" Ava met Bennett's eyes. Saw respect there. Saw something else, too. Gratitude, maybe. Or the kind of debt that couldn't be repaid with words. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I'm Midnight Viper." Bennett's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something that looked almost like relief. "Ma'am, would you come with me, please? The squadron would like to meet you." The words hung in the recycled air. Simple. Impossible. Terrifying in ways that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with being seen. "Colonel, I don't think—" Olivia's voice from somewhere up front, uncertain now, feeling the ground shift under her carefully constructed world. Bennett didn't even look at her. "This isn't a request, ma'am. It's a courtesy. And given what this woman did for my pilots, it's the least we can offer." "I'm sorry what this woman—" The businessman across the aisle found his voice, found his indignation. "There must be some mistake. She's just a pilot." Bennett cut him off, and there was steel in his voice now. The kind that made colonels into colonels and kept fighter squadrons alive when everything went to hell. "One of the best I've ever worked with, and if you have a problem with that, sir, you're welcome to take it up with me. Outside." The businessman's mouth clicked shut. Bennett turned back to Ava. His voice softened. "Ma'am, please. They've been waiting 3 years to say thank you." Ava's hands were shaking. Just slightly. Just enough that she had to press them against her thighs to make them stop. She looked past Bennett, past the staring faces and the dropped jaws, and the confusion rippling through the cabin like turbulence. She looked at the window, at the F-22s waiting on the tarmac, at the life she'd left behind and the life she'd tried to build, and the impossible space between them. "Okay," she whispered. Bennett stepped back, giving her room. Ava unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands remembered the motion muscle memory from 1,000 flights and reached up for her backpack. The businessman's designer luggage was still crushing it against the overhead bin wall. She pulled it free, carefully, felt the weight settle onto her shoulders like an old friend. The eagle patch caught the cabin light, still faded, still barely visible. But Bennett saw it. His eyes tracked to the worn fabric and something in his face went soft. "You kept it." "I kept a lot of things," Ava said, "whether I should have or not." She stepped into the aisle. The elderly woman who'd smiled at her earlier reached out, touched her hand. "Go on, dear, go on." Ava squeezed her fingers, nodded, started walking. The cabin had gone silent. Not the comfortable silence of people minding their business. The thick, breathless silence of people watching something they didn't understand but couldn't look away from. Every face turned to track her progress. Every eye locked on the woman in the frayed hoodie walking past first class, past business, past all the people who'd dismissed her an hour ago. Olivia stood near the galley, arms crossed, face tight, with something between confusion and anger. "Colonel, I really must insist. You can insist all you want." Bennett's voice was cordial. Empty. The tone of a man who had no time for bullshit and less patience for cruelty. "But this woman is coming with me, unless you'd like to explain to your superiors why you prevented a veteran from receiving military honors." "Military honors," Richard Hale. The businessman was on his feet, now blocking the aisle. Tall, confident, used to being the most important person in any room. "This is absurd. She's nobody. Look at her." Bennett looked at him. Really looked. The way a raptor looks at something small and loud and forgettable. "Sir, I'm going to give you one chance to sit down and be quiet. One chance. And then I'm going to have base security remove you from this aircraft and detain you until we determine whether you're a threat to military operations. Are we clear?" Hale's face went red, then white. Then he sat down. Bennett gestured toward the door. "After you, ma'am." Ava walked, felt her legs remember how to move with purpose, with direction, with the ground-eating stride of someone who'd crossed tarmacs in the dark with missions on her shoulders and fear in her throat, and no choice but to keep going. The stairs unfolded before her, and she descended into the afternoon light. The wind hit her first, Andrew's wind carrying the smell of jet fuel and hot concrete and possibility. She'd forgotten how much she missed it, how much her body remembered it, craved it, needed it, the way some people needed coffee or prayer or the sound of another human voice. The F-22s waited. Closer now. Real. 12 of them in perfect formation canopies, gleaming weapons pylons, empty, but somehow still dangerous just by existing, and standing in front of them pilots. 17 men and women in flight suits, helmets, underarms, faces turned toward the commercial aircraft like it was the most important thing in the sky. Young faces, mostly. Younger than Ava, by years, by lifetimes, by wars they'd never had to fight, because someone else had fought them first. Bennett came down the stairs behind her. His boots hit the tarmac, and he moved to her side. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside. "Squadron," he called out. His voice carried across the concrete, sharp and clear. "Attention!" As one, they snapped to. 17 bodies moving with synchronized precision, 17 souls inhabiting the same space between breath and discipline and respect. Ava stopped walking. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Could only stand there with her backpack and her hoodie and her disbelief. "At ease," Bennett said. Then he turned to Ava, and his voice changed. Got quieter. Got heavier. "Ma'am, I want you to meet the 27th Fighter Squadron. Some of these pilots served with you. Some came after. But every single one of them knows what you did. Every one of them owes you a debt we can't repay." "Colonel, I don't—" Ava's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I was just doing my job." "Your job." A woman stepped forward from the formation. Late 20s dark hair pulled back, tight eyes that had seen things and survived them. "Ma'am, your job was to fly reconnaissance. You weren't supposed to engage. You weren't supposed to lead 3 squadrons through a gauntlet that should have killed all of us." Ava recognized her. Not her face, but her voice. The voice that had come through the radio that night, scared and steady at the same time, asking for guidance when the sky turned into hell and the ground turned into death. "Eagle 6, Ava said. "You made it out." "Because of you." The woman's voice broke. Just for a second. Just enough to show the human underneath the uniform. "We all made it out because you didn't leave us." Another pilot stepped forward. Male older scar running through his left eyebrow. "You took fire meant for my wing. Drew off 3 bogeys so we could complete the run. You talked me through a hydraulic failure at night over hostile territory." This from a younger man, barely old enough to shave. "Kept me calm when I was ready to eject into the mountains." "You—" "Stop." Ava's voice came out harder than she meant it to. She held up a hand, and they stopped. All of them. Because even after 3 years, even in a hoodie, even invisible, she still had command when she needed it. "You all did your jobs. You all came home. That's what matters." "You didn't get to come home," the woman Eagle 6 said quietly. "They took your wings, classified the mission, made you disappear." Ava smiled, but it hurt. "I'm still here." "Are you—" Bennett's voice was gentle. "Because the woman I read about in the after-action reports wouldn't have let anyone move her to the back of a plane. Wouldn't have sat quiet while people mocked her. Wouldn't have made herself small." The words hit like bullets. Accurate. Devastating. True. Ava looked away. Looked at the F-22s because looking at them was easier than looking at the faces of people who still saw her as something she'd stopped being. That woman got people killed, got herself grounded, had to learn how to be someone else. "No one died on that mission," Bennett said. "Everyone came home." "Not everyone." Ava's voice was barely above a whisper. "The person I was before she didn't come home, she's still up there somewhere, still flying that night over and over." Silence. The wind picked up, pulling at her hoodie, at her hair, at everything she'd tried to hide behind. Then Bennett reached into his flight suit and pulled out something that made Ava's chest constrict. A helmet. Older model. Scratched. Used. With a call sign stitched into the fabric in thread that had once been gold, but had faded to bronze. Midnight Viper. "We kept it," Bennett said. "Couldn't return it to you because officially you were never there. But we kept it. Maintained it. Honored. Because someday we hoped you'd come back, and we could say what we should have said 3 years ago." He held it out to her. Ava stared at it. At the helmet that had been her second skin, her protection, her identity. At the stitching her own hands had done in a ready room half a world away, when being Midnight Viper meant everything and being Ava Reyes meant nothing. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Eagle 6 said. "And you should, because we need you to know you weren't forgotten. You weren't erased. You weren't nothing." Ava's hands shook as she reached out, touched the helmet, felt the cool curve of it under her fingers, felt the weight of it, felt every flight it represented, and every choice she'd made, and every person she'd saved or couldn't save, or tried to save and failed. She pulled it close, held it against her chest. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself remember not just the fear and the failure, but the flight itself, the perfect clarity of it, the impossible beauty of moving through air like you were born for it, like the sky was home and the ground was exile. "Thank you," she managed. Bennett saluted. Sharp. Perfect. The kind of salute that meant something. And then, one by one, the other pilots followed. 17 salutes. 17 acknowledgements. 17 people telling her that she mattered, that she'd mattered, that what she'd done had rippled forward through time and saved not just lives but families and futures and possibilities. Ava's vision blurred. She blinked hard, swallowed the tears, and with hands that remembered how, with hands that had done this 1,000 times, she returned the salute. Not perfect. Not anymore. But real. When she lowered her hand, Eagle 6 stepped forward again, reached into her pocket, pulled out something small and silver. A pin. Wings. The kind they gave to pilots who'd earned them, but modified. Enhanced. With a small engraving that caught the light. Midnight Viper. 27th FS. Never forgotten. We had them made, Eagle 6 said. One for each of us, to remember, and one for you, in case you ever came back. She held it out. Ava took it, stared at it, at the craftsmanship, and the care, and the stubborn insistence that she hadn't been erased no matter what the paperwork said. Where should I? Wherever you want it seen, Bennett said. Wherever you want people to know who you are. Ava looked down at her backpack, at the faded eagle patch that had been her only connection to the person she used to be. And with fingers that barely shook at all, she pinned the wings right next to it. The silver caught the sun, blazed like a small star. Impossible to miss now. Impossible to ignore. She was still staring at it when a voice called out from the commercial aircraft. Olivia at the top of the stairs, face tight with impatience, and something else. Something that might have been fear. We need to finish refueling and depart. Colonel, if you're finished? We're not finished, Bennett said. But we'll continue this in the air. Ava looked at him. In the air. He smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Ma'am, you didn't think we'd let you fly to DC without an escort, did you? We've got 2 birds ready to shadow you all the way to final approach. That's not you can't. We can. We are. And unless you want to tell these pilots they can't honor you properly, you're going to accept it. Ava looked at the squadron, at the faces that had seen her known, her remembered her when the rest of the world had moved on. Thank you, she said again, because there weren't other words, because thank you was too small, but it was all she had. Bennett walked her back to the stairs. The passengers inside were pressed against the windows now, faces pushed to the plastic, trying to see, trying to understand. Olivia stood at the door, arms still crossed, face carefully blank. As Ava climbed back into the aircraft, she heard Bennett's voice behind her, carrying through the open door. Squadron, prepare for escort duty. And someone get on the radio. I want every controller between here and Reagan to know who's in that commercial jet. Call sign and all. Ava stopped. Turned. Colonel, you don't have to. Ma'am, with respect, this isn't about what I have to do. It's about what we get to do. So go back to your seat, buckle in, and let us do our jobs. The way you let us do them when it mattered most. She nodded. Couldn't speak. Turned and walked back into the cabin. The silence that met her was different now. Not hostile. Not dismissive. Something else. Something confused and curious, and maybe a little afraid. She walked past first class, and every face tracked her. Past business where Richard Hale sat white-knuckled and silent. Past the galley where Olivia stepped back, like Ava carried something contagious. Back to economy. Back to row 32. Back to 32F. The elderly woman was crying quietly. When she saw Ava, she reached out again. Squeezed her hand hard. I knew, she whispered. I knew you were someone special. Ava smiled. sat down, buckled in, and pressed her hand against the window as the stairs pulled away and the door sealed and the engines began their familiar whine of preparation. Outside, the F-22s were moving, taxiing into position, two of them breaking from the formation and rolling toward the runway with predatory grace. Inside, the businessman across the aisle finally found his voice. "What the hell just happened?" But Ava didn't answer. She just watched through the scratched plastic as the Raptors lit their afterburners and punched into the sky, leaving twin trails of thunder in their wake. Waiting for her. The engine spooled up that familiar rising whine that Ava felt in her bones before she heard it with her ears. The commercial jet trembled with restrained power, and she pressed her palm flat against the window, feeling the vibration travel through the plastic through her skin, into the parts of her that had been dormant for 3 years. Captain Richardson's voice came through the intercom, and there was something different in his tone now. Something careful. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure, and I've been informed that we'll have a military escort for the remainder of our flight to Reagan National. This is a first for me in 20 years of flying. So sit back and enjoy what I'm told is going to be quite a show." Around Ava, the cabin erupted in whispers. Excited murmurs from some quarters, confused questions from others, and from the seats near her, a silence that felt heavy and uncertain, like people reassessing everything they thought they knew. The jet began to roll, slow at first, then picking up speed as it turned toward the runway. Through the window, Ava could see the squadron still assembled on the tarmac. 15 F-22s in formation, and 2 already airborne circling high above like patient predators. Her fingers found the silver pin on her backpack, traced the outline of the wings. The engraving was too small to read by touch, but she knew what it said, knew what it meant. And for the first time since they'd taken her wings, she let herself feel something other than shame about who she'd been. The jet turned onto the runway. Stopped. The engines climbed to full power, and Ava's heart climbed with them, muscle memory and instinct fusing into something that felt like coming home. They rolled, accelerated. The ground blurred past, and Ava counted the seconds in her head. Old habit, old training, old life bleeding through until the nose lifted and the wheels left Earth and they were flying. The climb was gentle, civilian gentle. Nothing like the aggressive angles she remembered, the climbs that pushed you back in your seat and made your vision narrow and reminded you that flight was violence made useful. But it was still flight, and that still mattered. At 5,000 feet, the radio crackled to life throughout the cabin. Not the intercom. The radio. Someone had patched it through to the passenger entertainment system, and suddenly everyone could hear what Ava used to live for. "Commercial flight 2847, this is Eagle 1. We have you in sight. Request permission to take station on your 3 and 9 o'clock. Captain Richardson's voice, uncertain, but trying to hide it. "Eagle 1, this is 2847. Permission granted. Is this standard escort protocol?" A pause. Then a different voice. Younger. Female. Eagle 6. "-2847. This is personal. You have someone very special aboard your aircraft. We're here to make sure she gets home safe." The cabin went absolutely silent. Ava closed her eyes, felt tears threatening again, and pushed them back. Not here. Not in front of these people. Not when she'd spent 3 years learning how to be invisible, and 15 minutes remembering what it felt like to be seen. Roger that, Eagle 1. Richardson's voice had changed. Got softer. Got something that might have been awe. We're honored to have the company. Through the window, Ava saw them. 2 F-22s sliding into position on either side of the commercial jet, matching speed, matching altitude, moving with the kind of precision that looked effortless, but required absolute mastery. The afternoon sun caught their canopies, turned them into mirrors, and for just a moment Ava could see the pilots inside, could see their helmets, their oxygen masks, their hands on the controls, could see herself 3 years ago, when that had been her life. The businessman Richard Hale was pressed against his window, now phone out recording. His hands shook slightly. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Do you see this?" His companion, a woman in a designer dress whose name Ava had never caught, nodded mutely. She'd been one of the ones laughing earlier, one of the ones making comments about the hoodie, about the seat assignment, about people who didn't understand class. She wasn't laughing now. Behind Ava, someone spoke. Male voice young, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "So what? She's military big deal. We all pay taxes. We all support the troops." The elderly woman in 32E turned in her seat, fixed him with a look that could have stripped paint. "Son, I don't think you understand what you just witnessed. Those pilots weren't following orders. They were paying respects. There's a difference." "Respects for what? Flying a plane?" The woman's husband leaned forward. He had kind eyes and age spots on his hands, and a voice that carried authority earned over decades. "For saving lives, you damned fool. For doing something you'll never understand, because you've never had to put yourself between other people and death. Now be quiet and learn something." The young man shut up. Ava wanted to thank them, but her throat was too tight. Instead, she kept watching the F-22s, kept feeling the impossible reality of them, kept trying to reconcile the woman she'd been with, the woman she'd become, with the woman she might still be underneath all the hiding. Olivia appeared in the aisle, moving slowly, carefully, like she was approaching something dangerous. She stopped at row 32, and Ava could feel her presence without looking. Could feel the weight of whatever Olivia was carrying, confusion maybe, or fear, or the awful realization that she'd been cruel to someone who deserved better. "Ma'am?" Olivia's voice was different, smaller. "Can I get you anything? Water? Something from first class?" "We have—" "Water's fine," Ava said quietly. "Thank you. I didn't know." The words came out in a rush. "I didn't know who you were. If I had, you would have treated me exactly the same until you found out I mattered." Ava turned to look at her now, met her eyes, held them. And that's the problem, isn't it? People shouldn't have to prove they're worth respect. They should get it by default. Olivia's face went red, then pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I'm sorry." "Okay," Ava said, because what else was there? The apology didn't change what had happened, didn't erase the casual cruelty or the seat reassignment or the menu withheld or the 100 small ways Olivia had communicated that Ava was less than. But it was something. Maybe. Olivia left. Ava went back to the window. The F-22s were still there, steady and sure, and watching them made something in her chest ache with longing so fierce it bordered on physical pain. The radio crackled again. 2847 Eagle 1. We're going to do a formation pass. Nothing aggressive. Just want your passenger to know we're thinking of her. Roger that, Eagle 1. She'll appreciate it. The F-22 on the right, the 3 o'clock position pulled up slightly, then rolled inverted. For a moment, the pilot was upside-down canopy facing the commercial jet, and Ava could see straight into the cockpit. Could see the pilot's helmet, the oxygen mask, the hand that came up in a crisp salute before the fighter rolled back upright and settled into position. The cabin erupted. Gasps, exclamations, the sound of phones clicking photos and recording videos. Even the people who'd been dismissive earlier couldn't hide their awe. But Ava barely heard them. She was crying now, silently, tears running down her face and dripping onto the hoodie she'd worn like armor. Crying because she'd forgotten what it felt like to be honored, to be remembered, to matter to someone other than Daniel and the quiet life they'd built in the ruins of her old one. "Ma'am." The elderly woman's hand found hers, squeezed. "It's okay to feel it. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay." Ava nodded, couldn't speak, held the woman's hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to Earth. Up front, first class was in chaos. Ava could hear fragments of conversation, could feel the shift in energy, as people who'd ignored her existence suddenly wanted to know everything. "Who is she? What did she do? Did you hear them say Midnight Viper? What does that mean? Someone look it up. Google it. Something." But there was nothing to find. That was the point. The mission had been classified, the record sealed, the people involved erased from public memory. The only evidence that any of it had happened was carried in the hearts of 17 fighter pilots and one woman in a frayed hoodie who'd tried very hard to forget. Richard Hale unbuckled his seatbelt, stood, turned to face the back of the plane. His cologne still announced him from 3 feet away, but his confidence had evaporated. He looked smaller now, uncertain. "Miss," he addressed Ava directly for the first time. "I owe you an apology. What I said earlier, what I implied. It was wrong." Ava looked at him. Really looked. Saw a man who'd probably never been dismissed in his life, never been made to feel small, never had to question whether he deserved the space he occupied. Saw someone learning a lesson he should have learned decades ago. "Apology noted," she said. "Not accepted, not rejected, just noted. Let him sit with that." He nodded, sat back down, pulled out his phone, stared at it like it held answers. A younger woman appeared in the aisle. Mid-30s, expensive, everything perfect hair. Tara Wells. Ava remembered the name from the boarding announcement, some kind of tech executive heading to DC for meetings. She'd been part of the chorus, earlier part of the laughter part of the cruelty disguised as observation. "I just want to say," Tara's voice shook slightly, "I'm sorry for laughing, for judging. I didn't understand." "You didn't need to understand," Ava said quietly. "You just needed to be kind. Understanding can come later. Kindness should come first." Tara nodded. Started to say something else. Stopped. Went back to her seat. One by one they came. The people who'd mocked her, dismissed her, looked through her like she was glass. One by one they offered apologies that ranged from genuine to self-serving to desperately uncomfortable. And Ava received them all the same way, quietly, without ceremony, without making them feel better or worse than they already felt. Because she knew something they were just learning. That shame was its own punishment. That living with yourself after you'd been cruel was harder than any external consequence. That the memory of your own smallness could haunt you longer than any grudge. The flight attendant who'd smiled at her earlier, the young one who'd noticed how she stowed her bag, appeared with a tray. Real silverware. First-class meal, a glass of wine that hadn't come from the economy cart. "I saved these before service started," she said. "Thought you might want them now." "You don't have to. I know." The young woman smiled. "But I want to. You deserve it. You deserved it from the beginning." Ava accepted the tray. The food tasted like nothing. Her appetite had vanished somewhere between the tarmac and the tears. But she ate anyway, because the gesture mattered, and the trying mattered, and sometimes you had to honor people's attempts at making things right, even when right was impossible to reach. The radio spoke again. Different voice this time. Older. Measured. Colonel Bennett. 2847, this is Eagle Actual. Wanted you to know you're carrying precious cargo. The woman in seat 32F flew a mission 3 years ago that saved 27 lives. 3 squadrons made it home because she led them through hell and didn't flinch. She took fire meant for others, stayed on station when every instinct said to run, and when it was over she disappeared without recognition or ceremony or the honors she'd earned. Today we are correcting that mistake. Today she flies with the respect she should have had all along. The cabin was absolutely still. Not a sound, not a breath. Every passenger absorbing Bennett's words, processing them, understanding finally what they'd witnessed and who they'd dismissed. Captain Richardson's voice came back, and there were tears in it. Ava could hear them even through the radio static. "Eagle Actual, it's an honor to have her aboard. We'll make sure she arrives safe. You have my word." Appreciated 2847. And Captain, tell her we're not just escorting the plane. We're escorting her, all the way home, all the way. Home. The word hit Ava like turbulence. Because where was home now? The apartment she shared with Daniel, full of quiet love and careful silences. The cockpit she'd been forced to leave, where everything made sense, and fear was just data to be processed. The sky itself, which had always felt more real than ground, she didn't know anymore. Wasn't sure she'd ever known. The F-22s stayed with them. Mile after mile, altitude changes and course corrections and the slow, steady progress toward DC. And through it all, the fighters matched them, shadowed them, protected them like the commercial jet was carrying something worth dying for. And maybe it was. Not Ava herself, but the idea of her. The promise that courage existed, that sacrifice meant something, that people still honored debts they couldn't repay. Somewhere over Virginia, a child's voice cut through the cabin's silence. Young girl, maybe 6 or 7, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mommy, is that the pilot lady? The one the soldiers are protecting?" Her mother shushed her, but not before Ava heard. Not before the words settled into her chest and nested there warm and terrifying. The pilot lady. Like it was her defining characteristic. Like everything else about her, the hoodie, the frayed cuffs, the cheap seat, the invisibility was just costume. And underneath was someone worth protecting. Ava turned in her seat, found the little girl 3 rows back, big eyes and braided hair, and a face full of wonder. She smiled. Small. Real. The kind of smile that cost something. The girl waved. Ava waved back. "When I grow up, I want to fly too," the girl announced. "I want to be brave like her." Her mother looked at Ava, mouthed, "Thank you," like Ava had done something other than exist, other than survive. Other than try to be small and fail because Bennett and his squadron refused to let her disappear. The plane began its descent. Slow, controlled, the kind of approach that gave passengers time to gather their things and prepare for landing. But Ava didn't move. Just watched through the window as DC took shape below the monuments, the Potomac, the buildings where decisions got made, and lives got changed, and history got written by people who'd never had to make the choices she'd made. The F-22s climbed, pulled up and away, not leaving but giving the commercial jet room to maneuver. And as they climbed, they rolled. Both of them simultaneously, a synchronized ballet of titanium and thrust that left contrails in the perfect blue. The radio crackled one more time. "Midnight Viper, this is Eagle 1. Ava's breath caught. They weren't talking to the plane anymore. They were talking to her. "We never thanked you. Not properly. Not the way you deserved. So we're saying it now where everyone can hear. Thank you for leading us home. Thank you for staying when you could have run. Thank you for being the kind of pilot, the kind of person worth following into hell." Ava's vision blurred again. She pressed her fist against her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that wanted to break free. Eagle 6's voice joined in. "You taught us that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. We carry that lesson every time we fly." Another voice, male, young. "You saved my life, ma'am. I have a daughter now. She's 2. She'll never know your name, but she exists because you didn't leave me behind." More voices, layering over each other. 17 pilots saying goodbye, saying thank you, saying all the things that had gone unsaid for 3 years because classification and protocol and fear had kept them silent. And then Bennett cutting through the chorus with command authority and something deeper. "Midnight Viper, you are cleared to land. Welcome home." But there was one more thing, one more moment that made Ava's carefully constructed composure finally shatter. A pause, a breath. Then Eagle 1 again, but different, formal. The voice of someone following protocol that mattered. All aircraft, this is Eagle 1. Midnight Viper is on final approach. Hold your formation." And through the window, Ava saw them. Not just the 2 F-22s that had escorted them. All of them. The entire squadron airborne, now arranged in a formation that took her breath away. Missing man formation. 4 jets in a diamond. And as the commercial plane descended one of them, the slot position pulled up sharply, climbing fast and hard, leaving a gap in the formation where someone used to be. It was a funeral honor, a tribute to the fallen, a way of saying someone was missing someone, mattered someone, left a hole that couldn't be filled. But Ava wasn't dead. She was right here in 32F, very much alive. And that's when she understood. The missing pilot in that formation wasn't representing death. It was representing loss. The loss of who she'd been, what she'd given up, the life she'd left behind. When they took her wings and told her to forget, they were mourning Midnight Viper and welcoming Ava Reyes home. The sob broke free. Ava pressed her face into her hands and let herself cry. Really cry. The kind of crying that shook her shoulders and made her chest heave and didn't care who saw or what they thought. The elderly woman's arm came around her, and Ava leaned into it, let herself be held by a stranger who somehow understood. "Let it out, dear," the woman whispered. "You've been holding it in too long." The wheels touched down. Smooth, professional. The kind of landing you barely felt. The cabin erupted in applause, not for the landing, but for something else. For Ava, for the escort, for whatever they'd just witnessed and were trying to process. But Ava barely heard it. She was still crying, still processing, still feeling the weight of 3 years of silence finally breaking apart. The plane taxied to the gate, slow, taking its time. And through the window, Ava could see people gathered at the terminal. Press, cameras, officials in uniforms and suits. Word had traveled. The escort had been noticed. And now there were questions that needed answers. Answers Ava wasn't sure she could give. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around her, passengers began gathering their things, but slower than usual. Uncertain. Like they were afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the cabin. Olivia's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Reagan National. Before we begin deplaning, I'd like to ask you to remain seated for just a moment." Confusion rippled through first class. The entitled started to grumble, to complain, to reach for their bags anyway. Then Olivia said something that made them stop. "We have someone very special aboard today. Someone who deserves to exit first, and I think we all owe her that respect." Silence. Then, starting from somewhere in business class, someone began to clap. Slow, deliberate. The sound of hands coming together not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. Others joined. One by one, row by row, until the entire cabin was filled with applause, and it was building toward Ava like a wave, and she realized with mounting horror and gratitude that they were clapping for her. She stood on shaking legs, reached for her backpack. The silver pin caught the cabin light, and she stared at it for a moment, the wings she'd thought she'd never wear again, the call sign she'd tried to forget, the evidence that she'd mattered once, and maybe still did. The aisle stretched before her, long, impossible, lined with faces that had judged her and dismissed her, and were now looking at her with something that might have been respect, or might have been guilt, or might have been both. Ava started walking, and as she passed, people stood. Not because they had to, but because something in them recognized that this was a moment, that moments like this required acknowledgement, that bearing witness was its own form of honor. Richard Hale stood, nodded. His eyes were red. Tara Wells stood, pressed her hand to her heart. The young tech bro who'd questioned why she deserved respect stood and couldn't meet her eyes. One by one they rose, and Ava walked through them, backpack on her shoulders, tears still wet on her face, heading toward the door, where she could see Daniel waiting, where she could see cameras and questions, and a life that was about to get complicated in ways she couldn't predict. But right now, in this moment, walking through this cabin full of people who finally saw her, she let herself be Midnight Viper one more time. And it felt like coming home. The jetway smelled like stale air and anticipation. Ava's legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the terminal, each step taking her closer to whatever came next. Behind her, she could hear the other passengers beginning to deplane, their voices hushed reverent, almost like they'd just witnessed something sacred and weren't quite sure what to do with it. Through the jetway windows, she caught glimpses of the gate area. Crowded. Too crowded. People with cameras, people in uniforms, people who looked official and important, and like they had questions she didn't want to answer. And standing at the front of it all, shoulders relaxed, but eyes alert, was Daniel. Her husband looked exactly like he always did, jeans, button-down shirt, rolled to the elbows, hands in his pockets, face calm. But Ava knew him, had learned to read the micro-expressions that most people missed. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes tracked her movement, assessing, making sure she was okay before he did anything else. The protective stance that said he was ready to step between her and the world, if she needed him to. She'd called him from Seattle before boarding, told him she was coming to sign the papers, close the file, put the last piece of the mission to rest. Hadn't told him about the flight, about the seat change, about any of it, because there'd been nothing to tell. Just another trip, just another reminder that she was nobody now. But looking at his face, at the way he was holding himself, she knew he'd heard. Someone had called him. Someone had told him what happened at Andrews, what was happening now, what was about to happen when she stepped into that terminal. The jetway ended, the gate area opened before her, and the noise hit like a physical force, camera shutters clicking, voices calling questions, the press of bodies trying to get closer to see better to capture whatever this was for whatever audience they served. Miss Reyes, can you comment on, is it true you flew a classified mission? What was your call sign? How does it feel to... Daniel moved. Not fast, but with purpose. He cut through the crowd like it wasn't there, like the cameras and the questions and the chaos were just weather to be navigated, and then he was in front of her, his hand finding hers, his presence creating a pocket of calm in the middle of the storm. "Hey," he said quietly. Just that. Just, hey. Like this was normal. Like she came home escorted by fighter jets every day. "Hey," Ava managed. Her voice came out rough, raw, from crying, from holding back, from 3 years of silence finally breaking apart. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged because okay was too simple a word for whatever she was feeling. "I don't know what I am." "That's fair." Daniel's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't alone. "You want to talk to them?" He gestured at the press, at the officials hovering at the edges, at the entire circus that had assembled to witness her arrival. "No," Ava said immediately. "I just want to sign the papers and go home." "Then that's what we'll do." Daniel turned to face the crowd, and something in his posture changed. Got harder. Got the kind of authority that came from years of knowing how to handle people who wanted things from you. "Excuse us, coming through." He didn't wait for them to move, just started walking, and Ava followed in his wake, hand still locked in the backpack, with its silver pin heavy on her shoulders. The crowd parted. Slowly, reluctantly, but they parted. The cameras kept clicking. The questions kept coming. But Daniel's presence created a buffer, and Ava clung to it like a lifeline. They were almost to the terminal exit when a voice cut through the noise. Female. Authoritative. Familiar. "Ava. Wait." Ava stopped, turned, and there, pushing through the crowd in a sharp suit and sharper heels, was Captain Jennifer Marsh. Air Force. JAG course. The lawyer who'd handled her debrief 3 years ago, who'd explained why the mission had to be classified, why the records had to be sealed, why Ava Reyes had to disappear so that Midnight Viper could be forgotten. "Captain Marsh." Ava's voice was flat. Neutral. The voice of someone who'd learned not to show emotion to people who held power over your future. "It's Colonel, now." Marsh stopped a few feet away, and her expression was complicated, professional, but underneath something that looked like regret. "Can we talk somewhere private? I'm here to sign papers, ma'am. That's all. Whatever else you need. The papers can wait." Marsh's voice dropped, got quieter, got more human. "Please, 5 minutes." Daniel's hand tightened on Ava's. Not controlling, just checking in, making sure she knew he'd back whatever she decided. Ava looked at Marsh, at the woman who'd taken her wings and her identity, and told her it was for the greater good. At the face that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, always explaining, always apologizing, but never actually giving back what she'd taken. 5 minutes, Ava said. "Then I'm done." Marsh nodded, led them through the crowd through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" into a small conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and stress. She closed the door, and the noise from outside became muffled, distant, manageable. For a moment, no one spoke. Marsh stood at the head of the small table, hands clasped, looking at Ava like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't have an answer. What happened today at Andrews shouldn't have happened, Marsh said finally. The escort, the radio broadcast, the public acknowledgement, all of it violated protocol. All of it compromised operational security. Then why did you let it happen? Daniel's voice was calm, dangerous, the tone of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms learning how to cut through bullshit. Marsh met his eyes. Because I couldn't stop it. Colonel Bennett filed the flight plan before anyone knew Ava was on that aircraft. By the time we found out, they were already airborne. And even if I could have stopped it. She paused, looked at Ava. I'm not sure I would have. Ava felt something shift in her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying we made mistakes. 3 years ago, when we classified your mission and erased your service record, we thought we were protecting operational security. We thought we were doing the right thing. Marsh pulled out a chair, sat down hard, like the weight of standing had become too much. But we weren't protecting security. We were protecting our own asses. Because if anyone found out what really happened that night, if they knew how badly command screwed up, how close we came to losing 3 squadrons because of bad intelligence and worse planning, there would have been consequences. Court-martials. Career-enders. So we buried it. And we buried you with it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ava's hand found the back of a chair, gripped it needed something solid to hold on to because the room felt like it was tilting. You're telling me... Her voice shook. She stopped, breathed, tried again. You're telling me you took my wings to cover up command's mistakes? Yes. Marsh's voice was steady, unflinching. The voice of someone who'd decided truth was more important than comfort. And I'm sorry. That apology doesn't fix anything, doesn't give you back 3 years, but it's true, and you deserve to hear it. Daniel's hand found Ava's shoulder. Squeezed. She leaned back into his touch, needing his steadiness, his certainty, his presence reminding her she wasn't the person they'd tried to erase. Why are you telling me this now? Ava asked. Because Bennett forced my hand. The moment he put that escort in the air, the moment he told your story over open channels, he made it public. And once it's public, I can't bury it anymore. The press is already digging. By tomorrow, your name will be everywhere. Your mission will be everywhere. And the Pentagon's going to have to answer questions we've spent 3 years avoiding. Marsh pulled a folder from her briefcase, set it on the table between them. These are the papers you came here to sign. Non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality clauses, all the legal barriers we built to keep you silent. She pushed the folder toward Ava. I need you to know something. If you sign these, you're agreeing to continue keeping quiet, to let the official story stand, to protect the people who sacrificed you to save their own careers. Ava stared at the folder, at the bureaucratic weight of it, at 3 years of silence condensed into legal language and binding agreements. And if I don't sign, Marsh smiled, thin, bitter, then you're free to tell your story. Free to speak about the mission, about what happened, about why you disappeared. And yes, there will be consequences. Investigations, hearings, people losing stars and pensions, and the careers they built on lies. She paused. But you'll also be free, truly free, for the first time in 3 years. The room was silent, except for the muffled sound of the airport beyond the walls. Ava could feel Daniel's presence behind her, solid and sure, could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. 3 years ago, she'd signed the first set of papers without question, because they'd told her it mattered that national security demanded her silence, that she was serving her country by disappearing. And she'd believed them, had wanted to believe them. Because if she didn't, then everything she'd given up was for nothing. But now she'd seen Bennett's face, heard Eagle 6's voice, watched 17 pilots stand at attention and offer her the respect that had been stolen. Now she knew the truth, that her silence hadn't protected anyone except the people who'd failed her. "I need to think about it," Ava said quietly. Marsh nodded. "Take your time. You have 48 hours before the Pentagon requires an answer." She stood, smoothed her suit, became Colonel Marsh again. Professional. Distant. "For what it's worth, Ava, I hope you don't sign. I hope you burn it all down. We deserve it." She left. The door closed. And Ava and Daniel were alone in the small conference room with the folder sitting between them like an unexploded bomb. Daniel moved around the table, pulled out the chair next to Ava, sat close enough that their shoulders touched. "What do you need?" "I need—" Ava's voice broke. She pressed her hands to her face, felt the tears threatening again. "I need this to not be my decision. I need someone else to tell me what's right. Because I don't know anymore. I don't know if staying silent protects the people I flew with or just protects the assholes who betrayed me. I don't know if speaking out makes me brave or just vindictive. I don't know anything except that I'm tired, Daniel. I'm so tired of carrying this alone." "You're not alone." His arm came around her, pulled her close. "You haven't been alone since the day you came home. And whatever you decide, I'm with you. We'll handle the consequences together." They sat like that for a long time. Long enough for Ava's breathing to steady. Long enough for the tears to stop threatening. Long enough for her to remember that she'd made harder decisions in worse circumstances and survived them all. Finally, she pulled back, looked at the folder, at the choice it represented. "I need to make a call first," she said. Daniel handed her his phone without question. Ava stared at the screen for a moment, then dialed a number she'd memorized 3 years ago and never deleted, even though she'd never thought she'd use it again. Bennett answered on the second ring. "This is Colonel Bennett." "Sir, it's Ava Reyes." A pause. Then his voice warmer now, more human. "Midnight Viper. I was hoping you'd call." "You knew," Ava said, "when you filed that escort plan, when you put those birds in the air, when you broadcast my story over open channels, you knew what it would do. You knew it would force everything into the open." "Yes, ma'am, I did." "Why? Why now? Why not 3 years ago, when it might have actually changed something?" Bennett's voice got quiet. Heavy. "Because 3 years ago I was a captain. I had no power, no platform, no way to fight the system without ending my career and accomplishing nothing. But now I'm a colonel. I have a squadron. I have resources. And when I found out you were on that flight, when I saw your name on that manifest—" He paused. "I saw a chance to do what I should have done 3 years ago. To honor you properly. To tell the truth. Even if it cost me everything." "It might," Ava said. "Marsh says there will be investigations. Consequences. Good. There should be. People should answer for what they did to you. And if I have to sacrifice my career to make that happen, then it was worth it. Because you sacrificed yours for us. And we never thanked you. We never fought for you. We let them erase you, and that's not honor. That's cowardice." Ava's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to do whatever you need to do to live with yourself. If that means signing those papers and moving on, I'll understand. I'll support you. But if it means fighting back, if it means telling your story and forcing the truth into daylight—" His voice hardened. "Then I want you to know you won't be fighting alone. My entire squadron will testify. We'll put our careers on the line. We'll make sure everyone knows what you did, what you gave up, and what they stole from you." Ava closed her eyes, felt something in her chest that had been frozen for 3 years finally start to thaw. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." "And Ava," his voice softened, Whatever you were before they took your wings, whatever you became after, you're still Midnight Viper. You're still the pilot who led us home. Nothing can change that. Not paperwork, not classification, not 3 years of silence. You're still who you've always been. The call ended. Ava handed the phone back to Daniel, and for a moment she just sat there processing, deciding becoming someone new out of all the pieces of who she'd been. Then she reached for the folder, opened it, scanned the dense legal language, the clauses and sub-clauses, the architecture of silence they'd built around her service, and she pushed it away. "I'm not signing," she said. Daniel smiled. "Good. They're going to come after me. The Pentagon, the lawyers, everyone who has something to lose if the truth comes out. Let them. My life is going to get complicated. It already is." Daniel took her hand. "But complicated doesn't mean bad. And speaking the truth doesn't mean you're vindictive. It means you're done protecting people who never protected you." Ava looked at him. At this man who'd loved her through 3 years of silence and nightmares and the slow, painful process of learning how to be human again. Who'd never asked her to be less than she was, who'd never made her apologize for the parts of herself that couldn't fit into civilian life. "I love you," she said. "I know, I love you too. Now, let's get out of here before someone tries to make you do a press conference." They left the folder on the table, left the conference room, walked back into the terminal where the crowd had thinned, but the cameras remained where people were still waiting to see what would happen next, to capture the moment for posterity, or profit, or whatever drove people to document other people's pain. A reporter stepped forward. Young woman, ambitious eyes, microphone extended. "Miss Reyes, is it true you flew a mission that saved 3 squadrons? Can you tell us what happened?" Ava stopped, looked at the camera, looked at the microphone, looked at all the faces watching her, waiting for her answer. 3 years ago, she would have said no comment, would have ducked her head and walked away, and protected the machine that had chewed her up and spit her out. But 3 years ago, she hadn't been honored by the people she'd saved, hadn't been reminded that her service mattered, that her sacrifice had meaning, that silence wasn't the same as honor. "Yes," Ava said clearly. "I flew that mission. And someday soon, I'll tell you about it. All of it. But not today. Today, I'm going home with my husband. Today, I'm remembering what it feels like to be proud of who I was and who I am. The rest can wait." The reporter opened her mouth to ask another question, but Daniel was already moving, already creating space, already guiding Ava through the crowd toward the exit. And this time, people actually moved, actually gave them room, actually treated her like someone who deserved respect. They made it outside into the late afternoon sun. The air smelled like exhaust and summer and possibility. Daniel's car was parked in short term, and they walked toward it in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of being together, of knowing when words mattered and when they didn't. Ava was almost to the car when she heard it. A sound that made her stop, made her turn, made her look up at the sky even though she knew what she'd see. The F-22s, still circling, still watching, still escorting her even though the flight was over, even though she'd landed, even though their mission was technically complete. One of them, she couldn't tell which, waggled its wings. The pilot's way of saying goodbye, of saying we see you, of saying fly safe. Ava raised her hand, waved, felt tears threaten again, but didn't fight them this time. Just let them fall while she watched the fighters climb, watched them punch through the clouds, watched them disappear into the blue she used to call home. "You miss it," Daniel said quietly. Not a question, an observation. "Every day," Ava admitted. "Every single day. Maybe you'll fly again. Someday. When this is all settled. when you're ready." Ava looked at him. At the hope in his face, the belief that things could be repaired, that what was broken could be fixed. And she wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that signing flying with Bennett's squadron again, that the sky could still be hers if she fought hard enough for it. But right now, standing in the parking lot with the afternoon sun warm on her face and her husband's hand in hers and the silver pin still catching light on her backpack, she realized something. She didn't need to fly to be Midnight Viper. She didn't need wings to be who she'd always been. She just needed to stop hiding, stop apologizing, stop making herself small so other people could feel big. "Maybe," she said, "but right now I just need to go home." They got in the car. Daniel drove. Ava watched the city scroll past the window, watched people going about their lives, unaware that somewhere above them, 2 F-22s were still flying, still watching, still honoring a debt they'd never been able to repay. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. She opened it. A photo. The squadron at Andrews. All 17 pilots. And in the center held high the helmet with her call sign stitched inside. Below the photo, 3 words from Bennett. "Welcome home, Viper." Ava stared at the screen until the tears made it too blurry to see. Then she put the phone away and leaned her head against the window and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back for 3 years. Fear, anger, grief, loss, but also finally impossibly something that felt like hope. Because she wasn't invisible anymore, wasn't erased, wasn't nothing. She was Midnight Viper, and Midnight Viper was going to fly again, even if it was only in the way she walked through the world. The apartment felt different when they walked in. Same furniture, same walls, same life they'd built together in the quiet aftermath of everything Ava had lost. But something had shifted. Like the air pressure had changed. Like the space itself knew she wasn't the same person who'd left that morning. Daniel dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, moved to the kitchen without asking, started making tea, because that's what he did when words weren't enough. And Ava stood in the doorway with her backpack still on, with the silver pin still catching the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, and tried to figure out how to exist in this in-between space. Not the pilot she'd been, not the invisible woman she'd become. Something else, something new and terrifying and maybe just maybe worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed again. She'd turned off the ringer an hour ago when the calls started coming in. Press, Pentagon officials, people from her old life who suddenly remembered she existed now that she mattered again. But the screen still lit up with notifications, texts, voicemails, messages that all wanted the same thing: her story, her truth, her pain packaged into sound bites. She silenced the phone completely, dropped it on the couch, sat down next to it, and finally let the backpack slide off her shoulders. The eagle patch stared up at her from the worn fabric, faded almost to nothing. And next to it, bright and new and impossible to ignore, the silver wings Bennett's squadron had given her. Evidence that she'd existed, that she'd mattered, that 3 years of erasure hadn't actually made her disappear. Daniel appeared with 2 mugs, set one in front of her, sat close enough that their knees touched. "You need to eat something." "I'm not hungry." "I know. You still need to eat." Ava smiled despite everything. "You're bossy when you're worried." "I'm always bossy. You're usually too polite to mention it." He sipped his tea, watched her with those calm, steady eyes that had seen her through panic attacks and nightmares and mornings when getting out of bed felt like climbing Everest. "Talk to me. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking..." Ava wrapped her hands around the mug. let the heat seep into her palms. I'm thinking that refusing to sign those papers might have been stupid, that I might have just made an enemy of the entire Pentagon, that my life is about to become a circus, and I have no idea how to handle it. Okay, what else? I'm thinking that I don't regret it. The words surprised her, but they were true. She could feel the truth of them settling into her bones. I don't regret it, Daniel. They took everything from me. My wings, my identity, 3 years of my life where I had to pretend I was nobody. And I let them because I thought that's what honor looked like. But it's not. Honor isn't silence. It's not protecting people who hurt you. It's standing up and saying this happened and it mattered and you don't get to erase me. Daniel set down his mug, took her hands. Then you made the right choice. And whatever comes next, we'll handle it. Together. The word settled over her like a blanket. Together. Not alone. Not carrying it by herself anymore. Together. Her phone lit up again despite being silenced. Ava glanced at it, saw a name that made her breath catch. Claire Donovan. She knew that name, not personally, but from briefings from news reports, from the careful way people in intelligence circles spoke about the woman who'd built a career on exposing military corruption. Investigative journalist, winner of awards Ava couldn't name, and relentless. Ava picked up the phone, read the message. Miss Reyes, I'd like to speak with you about your service, not for a hit piece, not for clicks, because your story deserves to be told properly, and because the people who silenced you deserve to answer for it. I can help, if you'll let me. Below the text, a phone number. Ava stared at it, at the possibility it represented, at the door it could open if she was brave enough to walk through it. What is it? Daniel asked. Someone who wants to help. Ava showed him the message. Or someone who wants a story. I can't tell which. Does it matter if the story gets told either way? It was a good question. Ava wasn't sure she had a good answer. She'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible, learning that wanting things led to disappointment, learning that the safest path was the one where you didn't make waves, or ask questions, or expect anything from anyone. But that version of herself, the small, silent, invisible version, had died somewhere between Seattle and Andrews. Had been replaced by someone who'd stood on a tarmac and accepted a salute and remembered what it felt like to be seen. She typed a response before she could talk herself out of it. I'll talk to you, but not today. Call me tomorrow. Send. And just like that, the future shifted again. Became something with shape and possibility and risk. Daniel squeezed her hand. Proud of you. Don't be proud yet. I might still lose my nerve. You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He smiled. Because you're Midnight Viper, and Midnight Viper doesn't run. The name hit her different now. Not like shame. Not like something she had to hide. Like identity. Like truth. Like the core of who she was underneath all the fear and silence. They sat together as the afternoon faded into evening. Drank tea. Ate the dinner Daniel insisted on making, even though Ava barely tasted it. Existed in the quiet space of 2 people who didn't need to fill silence with words, because presence was enough. Around 9, Ava's phone rang. Actual call this time, not text. She almost didn't answer. But the number was local, military prefix. Could be important. Hello? Ava? It's Jennifer Marsh. Ava straightened. Put the phone on speaker so Daniel could hear. Colonel, I heard you didn't sign the papers. I wanted to make sure you understood what that means. What's coming? I understand. Do you? Marsh's voice was sharp, professional. but underneath something that sounded like concern. The Pentagon's lawyers are already drafting responses. They're going to argue classification national security operational necessity. They're going to try to discredit you, paint you as unstable, unreliable, someone with an axe to grind. Let them try. Ava's voice was steady, calmer than she felt. I have 17 fighter pilots who will testify otherwise. I have Bennett. I have the truth. What do they have? Paperwork and lies. A pause. Then Marsh laughed, short, bitter. You sound like the pilot from the after-action reports. The one who told a 2-star general that bad planning on his part didn't constitute an emergency on hers. I said that you did. Right before you flew the mission that saved 3 squadrons and should have earned you a medal instead of a gag order. Marsh's voice softened. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you should know. Bennett's not the only one putting his career on the line. There are others. People who were there. People who knew what really happened and kept quiet because they were ordered to. They're coming forward. Filing statements. Demanding investigations. You started something today, Ava, and it's bigger than you realize. Ava felt something in her chest expand. Hope, mixed with fear, mixed with the dizzying sense that the ground was shifting, and she had no idea where she'd land. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know you're not alone. Because what we did to you was wrong. And because... Marsh paused. Because my daughter's 10. She wants to be a pilot. And I want her to grow up in an Air Force that honors its heroes instead of burying them. You're giving us a chance to be better. And I'm grateful for it. The call ended. Ava set the phone down with shaking hands, looked at Daniel, saw her own disbelief reflected in his face. Did that just happen? She whispered. I think so. People are coming forward. Bennett, Marsh, others. Because you gave them permission to. Daniel pulled her close. You showed them it was possible. That speaking truth to power didn't have to be career suicide. That sometimes the right thing is worth the risk. Ava leaned into him, let herself be held, let herself feel the weight of what she'd set in motion. I'm scared. I know. What if I can't handle it? What if it's too much? What if I break? Then you break. His voice was matter-of-fact, gentle. And then you heal. And then you keep going, because that's what you do. That's who you are. They went to bed early, both exhausted from a day that had started in Seattle and ended in revolution. But sleep didn't come. Ava lay in the dark, listening to Daniel breathe beside her, watching shadows move across the ceiling, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Her phone buzzed one more time. She should have ignored it, should have let it wait until morning. But something made her reach for it. Another photo. This one from Eagle 6. The entire squadron again. But different. They were at attention, and spelled out in front of them, written in stones on the tarmac, 2 words. Thank you. Below the photo, a message. You gave us our lives. We're giving you yours back. Whatever you need. Whenever you need it. We're here. Ava pressed the phone to her chest. Let the tears come. Let herself feel the impossible weight of being honored, of being remembered, of mattering to people who could have forgotten her but chose not to. And somewhere in the crying, somewhere in the grief and gratitude and overwhelming sense of being seen, she fell asleep. She dreamed of flying. Not the mission, not the fear or the fire or the desperate calculations that had kept everyone alive. Just flying. Pure flight. The way it felt when everything worked right, when the aircraft became an extension of your body, when the sky opened up and welcomed you home. She woke to sun streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee and Daniel's voice in the other room, calm and firm. No, she's not available for comment yet. Yes, I understand your deadline. No, that's not my problem. Ava smiled, got up, found him in the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, and a look on his face that said he was 2 seconds from telling someone exactly where they could shove their deadline. She took the phone from him, hung it up. Let it go to voicemail. There are 17 voicemails already. Then 18 won't hurt. She poured coffee, looked out the window at the morning that felt different from every morning that had come before. Claire Donovan's calling at 10. I want to talk to her. Hear what she has to say. And if you don't like what she has to say, then I find someone else. But I'm done being silent, Daniel. I'm done pretending I'm nobody. I'm done protecting people who never protected me. She turned to face him. I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually. But I'm also done. And I think done is stronger than scared. Daniel smiled, pulled her close, kissed her forehead. There she is. There's my wife. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls screened and messages ignored, and the careful construction of boundaries around what Ava was willing to share. And with whom. Claire Donovan called at exactly 10. Professional, direct, asked good questions and listened to the answers. And by the time the call ended, Ava had agreed to an interview. On the record, with full use of her name and call sign and the truth about what had happened 3 years ago. This is going to make waves, Claire warned. Big ones. Careers will end. Investigations will open. The Pentagon's going to fight back hard. I know, Ava said. I'm ready. And she was. Or close enough. Ready enough to try. Ready enough to stop hiding. Ready enough to be Midnight Viper in broad daylight instead of just in her memories. The interview aired 2 weeks later. Prime time. Major network. An hour of Ava's voice telling the story the Pentagon had tried to bury. The mission. The failures. The command decisions that had nearly killed 3 squadrons. And the pilot who'd led them home anyway, only to be erased for her trouble. Ava watched it with Daniel. Saw herself on screen looking small and nervous and determined. Heard her own voice explaining what had happened, why she'd stayed silent, what had changed on that tarmac at Andrews when Bennett had given her back her call sign and her identity. You did good, Daniel said when it was over. Did I? Ava wasn't sure. Wasn't sure about anything except that there was no taking it back now. No more hiding. No more pretending. Her phone exploded. Hundreds of messages. Thousands. People she'd never met thanking her for her service. Veterans sharing their own stories of being silenced. Active duty pilots saying they were inspired. And buried in all of it a handful of messages from the people who mattered most. Bennett. The entire squadron watched. We're proud of you, Eagle 6. You just changed the Air Force. They don't know it yet, but you did. Marsh expect congressional hearings. Probably a formal investigation. Maybe criminal charges against command. You started a fire, Ava. And it's spreading. Ava read them all. Let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. The possibility of it. The risk of it. The impossible, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all of this pain. 3 months later, the headlines read, Pentagon opens investigation into classified mission cover-up. 6 months after that, 4 senior officers face court-martial for mission failures. And a year after that, standing in a small ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base, with Daniel beside her and Bennett's squadron assembled behind her, Ava accepted the medal she should have received 3 years earlier. Distinguished Flying Cross. For extraordinary achievement during an aerial mission where she'd led 3 squadrons through hostile territory and brought everyone home alive despite command failures and enemy action. The medal was heavy, real. Evidence that she'd existed, that her service mattered, that silence hadn't erased her after all. But it wasn't the medal that made her cry. It was what came after. When the formal ceremony ended and the cameras stopped rolling, and Bennett approached her with something in his hands. Her old flight suit. Cleaned, pressed, with her call sign stitched on the chest where it belonged. "We kept it," he said. "Thought you might want it back." Ava took it with shaking hands, felt the familiar fabric, saw her own name next to the call sign. Midnight Viper. Like she'd never left. Like the 3 years had been a bad dream, and now she was waking up. "I can't fly anymore," she said. "Medical discharge. It's permanent." "I know." Bennett's voice was gentle. "But you're still a pilot. You'll always be a pilot. And if you want to fly again, not in combat, just fly, I can arrange simulator time, training runs. Hell, I'll take you up in the 2-seater myself if you want, because you earned it, and because some of us remember what it means to honor our debts." Ava pressed the flight suit to her chest, looked at the squadron assembled behind Bennett, at Eagle 6 giving her a thumbs up, at the young pilot who'd mentioned his daughter, at all 17 faces that had refused to forget her, even when forgetting would have been easier. "Thank you," she managed. "For everything. For remembering. For fighting. For not letting them erase me." "You don't erase people like you," Bennett said simply. "You just hope you're worthy of following them." The ceremony ended, people dispersed, and Ava stood on the tarmac with Daniel's hand in hers, and the flight suit over her arm, and the medal heavy against her chest, watching F-22s take off into the late afternoon sun. She didn't need to fly them anymore, didn't need the sky to prove who she was, because she'd learned something in the year since that commercial flight, since the moment Bennett had looked at her and seen Midnight Viper instead of the invisible woman in the frayed hoodie. She'd learned that courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being terrified and speaking anyway. That honor wasn't about silence. It was about truth. That being seen wasn't weakness. It was the most powerful thing you could do. And standing there watching the fighters climb into the blue, Ava realized something else. Something that made her smile despite the tears. She was still flying. Just differently. In the way she walked through the world now without apologizing. In the way she told her story without shame. In the way she'd taken everything they'd stolen and built something new from the pieces. She was still Midnight Viper. Would always be Midnight Viper. Not because of the call sign, or the medal, or the recognition that had finally come. But because she'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that you couldn't erase someone who refused to disappear, that the sky wasn't just above you, it was inside you, part of who you were, something no one could take away no matter how hard they tried. Daniel squeezed her hand. Ready to go home. Ava looked up one more time, watched the contrails write temporary poetry across the endless blue, felt the wind on her face and the sun on her shoulders, and the impossible lightness of being free. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." And they walked away from the runway together, leaving the past behind, but carrying its lessons forward, two people who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible when the world demands it. The jets disappeared into the distance. The tarmac went quiet, and somewhere high above in the space between earth and sky where pilots lived, Ava's call sign kept flying. Would always keep flying. Because some things, courage, truth, the refusal to be erased, were stronger than silence, stronger than fear, stronger than anything that tried to diminish them. Midnight Viper had come home, and she was never disappearing again.